In 1902, Howard Carter stood at a doorway in the Valley of the Kings and made a decision that would define his reputation for the next 20 years and quietly undo it for the 20 years after that. He looked at what was inside. He decided it was worthless. And then he ordered his workers to fill the entrance with rubble from his other excavations and move on. Carter was not a careless man. He was the archaeologist who would go on to find Tutankhamun, the most precise, most patient, most methodical digger the Valley of the Kings had ever seen. And he looked at that doorway and he buried it. It stayed buried for 93 years. The Valley of the Kings in the early morning, before the tourist coaches arrive, has a particular quality of silence. The limestone cliffs hold the heat from the previous day. The gravel underfoot is pale and fine. The tomb entrances are cut into the rock at irregular intervals, some at ground level, some partway up the cliff face, and they are numbered on small metal signs, the way a filing system is numbered. Functional, precise, exhaustive, or so it appears. That filing system has a gap in it. A tomb that was entered, assessed, and dismissed so completely that for nearly a century it did not appear on the working map of the valley at all. Its entrance was not gated, it was not marked, it was not visible. Carter's spoiled the limestone chips and debris from his other digs. I filled it to the lintel and buried the doorway so thoroughly that from a few meters away, it was indistinguishable from a natural fissure in the cliff. Every archaeologist who worked in the valley after 1902 walked past it. Every expedition, every survey team, every tourist. The entrance was there, under the rubble Carter's workers had piled against it. And nobody stopped. Here is what was behind that rubble. 130 chambers. A pillared hall larger than any room in any other tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Larger than anything in Tutankhamun's tomb. Larger than anything in the tomb of Seti I. Larger than anything in the tomb of Rameses II himself. A corridor flanked by 20 side chambers, leading to a statue carved directly from the bedrock at its terminus. Staircases descending to lower levels, that have still, as of today, never been fully cleared. The largest tomb ever built in the Valley of the Kings. And Carter looked at the front rooms, decided there was nothing there, and used the entrance as a garbage dump. The question this video is going to answer is not whether Carter was negligent. The evidence on that is more complicated than it first appears, and it matters. Because the real story of KV5 is not about one man's mistake. It is about what happens when the most important discovery in a place is hiding inside the assumption that there is nothing left to find. We are going to go through that doorway, all the way to the back. The tomb designated KV5 sits at the mouth of the Valley of the Kings, closer to the entrance than almost any other royal burial. Every expedition that ever unloaded equipment, every team that ever mapped the cliff face, passed within meters of it on their way to somewhere else. The first post-Renaissance person to enter KV5 was James Burton, a British Egyptologist, in 1825. Burton mapped what he could reach a few chambers near the entrance, sketched a rough plan, and recorded his conclusion. The tomb was, in his words, all in a state of ruin. His sketch and field notes are held today at the British Library. He assigned the tomb no particular significance, and neither did anyone who read his account afterward. In 1827, John Gardner Wilkinson surveyed the valley's known openings and assigned each a number. KV5 received its designation in that survey. The fifth tomb catalogued in the King's Valley. The number stuck. The tomb did not. Howard Carter arrived at KV5 in 1902, working under the patronage of Theodore Davis, the American businessman who held the excavation concession for the valley. Carter examined the front chambers, reached the same conclusion Burton had reached 77 years earlier, and made a decision that would define the tomb's fate for nearly a century. He used the entrance as a dumping ground for spoil, the limestone chips and debris generated by his excavations elsewhere in the valley. The entrance was filled. KV5 disappeared from the working map. It remained off that map until 1987, when Kent R. Weeks, professor of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo and director of the Theban Mapping Project, relocated the entrance during a systematic survey of the entire valley floor. The Theban mapping project had been working since the 1970s to produce the first accurate architectural atlas of every tomb in the valley. KV5 was on Wilkinson's original list. Weeks needed to account for it. What he found when he relocated the entrance was Carter's debris. The clearance began that year. It would take 8 years before anyone understood what was being cleared. The first chambers of KV5 are modest. Low ceilings, debris-stained walls, the kind of cramped antechamber Burton and Carter would have recognized from dozens of other valley tombs. Nothing in those front rooms suggests what lies beyond them. Chamber 3 is different. It measures roughly 16.44 meters by 15.64 meters. 16 square pillars rise from the floor in a grid 4 columns wide and 4 deep, receding into darkness in every direction from the entrance. The ceiling, where it survives, still carries traces of painted decoration. When Weeks's team began to clear it, the measurements confirmed what the geometry already suggested. Chamber 3 is the largest single room ever found in any tomb. In the Valley of the Kings, larger than any chamber in Tutankhamun's tomb, larger than any room in the tomb of Seti I, widely considered the most elaborately decorated royal burial in the valley, larger than any chamber in the tomb of Rameses II himself, the man who ordered KV5 built. Egyptologists interpret large pillared halls as spaces designed for ritual, for the performance of funerary liturgy, for the movement of priests and offerings, for the visual staging of power even in death. A pillared hall of this scale is consistent with a tomb designed to house multiple royal burials simultaneously over an extended period. But the official explanation that the hall's size reflects the ambition of the longest reigning pharaoh of the New Kingdom does not account for one specific detail. No other pharaoh, not even those with longer reigns or greater resources, built anything structurally equivalent for their children. The 16-pillared hall in KV5 is not just large. It is, architecturally, without precedent. The question it raises is not why Rameses II built it. The question is what he expected to fill it. Beyond Chamber 3, the tomb changes register entirely. A long corridor runs from the rear of the pillared hall, extending deep into the bedrock. Along its length, 10 chambers open on the left side and 10 on the right, 20 side chambers in total, each one cut from the living rock, each one originally intended to receive a burial. The corridor is not decorative. It is functional in the way that a spine is functional. Everything branches from it, and it leads, without deviation, to a single terminus. At the end of that corridor stands a statue of Osiris. Not placed there, not installed as a separate object, carved directly from the bedrock, the same limestone that forms the walls and floor and ceiling of the tomb, so that the figure emerges from the mountain itself. The god of the dead, arms crossed at the chest in the mummiform posture, cut from the living rock at the deepest reachable point of the tomb's central axis. Egyptologists identify the figure as Osiris on the basis of the posture, the iconographic parallels with New Kingdom royal contexts, and the theological logic of the placement. The god of resurrection, positioned at the terminus of a corridor, lined with the burials of royal sons, presiding over the dead who were buried in his name. But this specific arrangement, a rock-cut deity at the terminus of a multi-chamber corridor, flanked symmetrically by 20 side chambers, appears in no other royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Not in the tomb of Rameses II, not in the tomb of Seti I, not in any of the 60-plus numbered tombs that constitute the valley's inventory. The arrangement is unique, and uniqueness in Egyptian royal architecture is almost never accidental. What it was designed to achieve, what theological or ritual logic demanded that specific configuration, remains an open question in the published literature. Among the debris cleared from Chamber 2, Weeks's team recovered skeletal material. A complete skeleton, 3 partial skeletons, forensic anthropological analysis, published in the 2006 Theban Mapping Project report, concluded that 2 of the individuals were most probably related to Rameses II, and a third was likely related. Those are careful words. Forensic anthropology in an Egyptian context is constrained by preservation conditions, by the absence of comparative reference samples, and by the limitations of pre-DNA analysis. The skeletal identifications are probabilistic, not definitive. The Canopic jar fragments are more specific. Recovered from within KV5, the fragments bore inscriptions, identifying 4 of Rameses II's royal sons by name. Amunherkhepeshef, his firstborn; Rameses, his second son; Sethy, his 9th; and Mery-Atum, his 16th. These are not generic dedicatory inscriptions. Canopic jars were made for specific individuals, inscribed with their names and titles, and placed with their specific organs. The fragments name the dead. Egyptologists interpret this as confirmation that KV5 functioned as a collective mausoleum for multiple sons of Rameses II, a purpose supported by the tomb's architecture, its scale, and its corridor system, which is designed to accommodate large numbers of individual burials, rather than a single royal interment. But Rameses II is documented to have fathered at least 96 sons. 4 are named in the canopic fragments recovered so far. The tomb has 130 confirmed chambers. Roughly 7% of KV5 has been cleared. The arithmetic of what remains is not reassuring. The cleared portion has yielded 4 names. The uncleared portion, 93% of the structure, has yielded nothing yet, because no one has reached it. The cleared portions of KV5 occupy its upper register: the 16-pillared hall, the T-shaped corridor system, the side chambers along the central axis. These are the levels Burton and Carter had nominal access to, where flood debris was shallow enough to enter, even if neither man penetrated far. Below them, staircases descend. Multiple stairways cut from the bedrock lead to lower levels that, as of the most recently published Theban Mapping Project reports, remain mostly unexcavated. The geological and hydrological surveys in the 2006 technical publication document the conditions in those lower reaches. Flash flood water, entering through the tomb's entrance over centuries, carried limestone silt downward through the stairwells, filling the lower chambers to the ceiling in places. The weight of that material, compacted over 3,000 years, makes clearance slow and structurally complicated. In Egyptian royal tomb architecture, the lower levels are typically where the primary burials are placed. The upper rooms serve preparatory and ritual functions. The burial chambers are below. KV5's lower levels have not been reached. There is a document in the Turin Museum written in the 13th century BCE, a papyrus that accuses a man named Kanina of stealing stones from the tomb of the royal children. It is possibly the earliest known reference to KV5 in any source, and it describes the tomb as already significant enough to loot, already identified specifically as a burial place for royal children. The tomb was known, it was named. Someone thought it worth the risk of robbery. What they took, and what they left behind in the lower levels, remains unanswered. Burton entered KV5 in 1825. Weeks's team broke through into the unentered corridor system in February 1995. Between those two dates, 170 years. 2 generations of professional Egyptologists. The most intensively excavated site in Egyptian archaeology, and the largest tomb in the valley, sitting at the entrance to it, formally catalogued, formally numbered, formally dismissed. The dismissal has a structural explanation. Burton reached the front chambers and found them filled with debris. The debris was real. Flash floods had been depositing material through the entrance for centuries, and the front rooms were genuinely unpromising. Carter made the same assessment from the same evidence. Neither man was negligent by the standards of their era. They did what working archaeologists do. They made a judgment call based on visible evidence and moved on. Egyptologists describe the dismissals as understandable, given the tools and methods available at the time. Ground-penetrating radar did not exist in 1902. systematic architectural survey of the entire valley floor. The methodology that allowed Weeks to relocate and reassess KV5 was not undertaken until the Theban mapping project began in the 1970s. But the official explanation does not fully account for one specific fact. Carter's decision was not passive. He did not simply leave KV5 alone. He actively used its entrance as a dump for spoil from his other excavations. The debris he deposited was not flood material. It was a deliberate act that made re-entry harder for anyone who came after him. He buried it again, not out of malice. Almost certainly out of simple operational convenience. The entrance was there, it was open, it needed to be filled so his other work could proceed safely. But the effect was the same as intentional concealment, and it held for 93 years. The 1995 breakthrough was not a single moment. It was the product of 8 years of incremental clearance work that most people outside specialist Egyptology never heard about. Weeks and the Theban mapping project had been removing Carter's spoil and flood debris from KV5's front chambers since 1987. The work was slow. The material was compacted. In some areas, the debris reached the ceiling, leaving no passage at all. Progress was measured in centimeters per day rather than chambers per season. By early 1995, the team had cleared enough of Chamber 3 to reach its rear wall. Gate 7 was there, a doorway cut through the limestone, at the back of the pillared room. The debris level on the far side was unknown. The team could not see what lay beyond it without physically entering. In February 1995, they went through. The flood debris level on the far side had dropped. There was clearance enough to move forward, enough to see the corridor extending ahead, enough to confirm that the passage had not been entered since the ancient period. The floor sediment was undisturbed. There were no modern footprints, no excavation marks, nothing that postdated the tomb's original use. The architectural survey that followed was published in comprehensive form in Kent R. Weeks's 2006 technical report, KV5, a preliminary report on the excavation of the tomb of the sons of Rameses II in the Valley of the Kings, issued by the American University in Cairo Press. The 16-pillared hall's measurements were confirmed. The T-shaped corridor system was mapped. The side chambers were counted and catalogued. The rock-cut Osiris statue at the corridor's terminus was documented and photographed. The forensic anthropological analysis of the skeletal material from Chamber 2 was conducted as part of the same project. The Canopic jar fragments, bearing the names of Amunherkhepeshef, Rameses, Sethy, and Mery-Atum, were matched to the inscriptional record of Rameses II's sons, using the epigraphic database assembled by the Theban mapping project across decades of survey work on the west bank of the Nile. The 2006 report also documented, with geological precision, why the lower levels remain inaccessible. The hydrological analysis traces the path of flash flood water, entering through the tomb's entrance over approximately 3,000 years. The same floods that deposited the debris Burton and Carter encountered, but continuing downward through the stairwells into the lower register. The silt in those lower levels is not loose, it is consolidated. In places, it is structurally load-bearing. Its removal destabilizes the carved walls and ceilings around it. Clearance requires shoring. Shoring requires resources. As of the latest published updates, the figure is consistent. Approximately 7% of KV5 has been cleared. The science exists to analyze whatever is down there. Ancient genomic analysis, the methodology that has reconstructed population movements across the ancient Near East and identified familial relationships in royal Egyptian burials, could, in principle, establish definitive identifications of any intact remains recovered from KV5's lower chambers. The remains have not been reached. The analysis cannot begin until they are. Return to February 1995. The moment Weeks's team went through Gate 7 and found the debris level drop. What they were looking at, in that first moment of entry, was a corridor that had not been entered for approximately 3,200 years. The last people to walk that passage were ancient Egyptians. Priests, most probably. or workers sealing the tomb after its final use, sometime in the reign of Rameses II or shortly after. The floor silt was undisturbed. The walls still carried painted decoration, in places where the floodwater had not reached, and ahead of them, receding into the darkness, the corridor, the side chambers opening left and right, the geometry of the T-shaped system extending in both directions. And at the far end of the central axis, visible once they moved forward with lights, the rock-cut Osiris figure, carved from the bedrock, arms crossed, presiding over a space no living person had stood in since the Bronze Age. This is what the opening section of this story was holding. Not a conspiracy, not a suppression in the modern political sense. Something quieter and in some ways more disquieting. The largest tomb ever built in the Valley of the Kings was missed, because the people who found it first looked at the front rooms and made a reasonable professional judgment. The rubble was real, the flood damage was real, the apparent insignificance of the entrance was real. What was not real was the conclusion they drew from it. Burton's 1825 sketch shows a handful of chambers. It is an accurate record of what Burton could physically access. It is not an accurate record of what existed beyond the debris line he could not pass. Carter's 1902 assessment was made from the same vantage point, compounded by the practical decision to dump his spoil there and move on. Neither man was wrong about what they could see. Both men were wrong about what that meant. Kent Weeks understood this distinction because he approached KV5 with a different methodology. The Theban mapping project was not looking for treasure. It was conducting a systematic architectural census of the entire valley, accounting for every numbered tomb, however unpromising, however thoroughly it appeared to have been assessed by earlier workers. KV5 was on the list. Weeks cleared it because it was on the list. That methodological difference, census versus prospecting, is what separated 170 years of dismissal from the 1995 breakthrough. The tomb did not change. The approach did. What the breakthrough revealed, cumulatively across 3 decades of subsequent clearance, KV5 is a royal mausoleum without architectural parallel in Egyptian history. Its 16-pillared hall is the largest single chamber in the valley. Its corridor system, with the rock-cut Osiris at its terminus, represents a theological and architectural conception found nowhere else. Its canopic jar fragments name 4 of Ramesses II's sons, with the specificity of a documentary record. Its skeletal remains carry forensic signatures consistent with the royal family of the 19th dynasty, and 93% of it has not been cleared. The opening of this investigation asked 2 questions. The first, what does it mean that 2 trained Egyptologists looked at this tomb and turned around? The answer is that they looked at the front rooms of a structure, designed to conceal its own scale. Not as a design flaw, but as a design feature. Egyptian royal tomb builders understood that the most sacred spaces were reached only through effort, only through passage, only by those who committed to the full depth of the structure. The front rooms of KV5 were never meant to be the point. The second question was harder. What is still down there, in the levels no one has reached? That question does not yet have an answer. It is worth being precise about what we know and what we do not. We know KV5 exists. We know its confirmed dimensions. We know the 16-pillared hall is the largest single chamber in the Valley of the Kings. We know the rock-cut Osiris stands at the terminus of the central corridor. We know the canopic jar fragments name 4 specific sons of Rameses II. We know the forensic analysis uses the language of probability. Most probably, likely, because the science available at the time of analysis did not permit certainty. We know that 7% of the tomb has been cleared. What we do not know is whether the lower levels contain intact burial chambers. We do not know whether any mummies survived the ancient looting. The Turin papyrus suggests occurred no later than the 13th century BCE. We do not know whether the 93% still uncleared holds grave goods, inscriptions, skeletal remains, or simply more consolidated flood silt. The temptation here is to reach for the largest possible claim, to say that somewhere beneath the Valley of the Kings, in the unexcavated lower levels of KV5, intact royal mummies are waiting. That claim is not supportable. The ancient looting is real. The flood damage is real. The conditions in the lower levels are not favorable to organic preservation, in the way that the sealed, dry conditions of Tutankhamun's tomb were. What is supportable and remarkable enough without embellishment is this. The largest tomb ever cut in the Valley of the Kings was built by the longest reigning pharaoh of the New Kingdom, as a house for his dead children. It was designed on a scale and with an architectural logic that has no parallel in 3,000 years of Egyptian royal burial practice. It was entered twice by professional archaeologists who declared it worthless. It was buried under the debris of its own investigators' other work for nearly a century. And when it was finally cleared far enough to reveal what it actually was, the answer was not a single burial or a collapsed shaft or an insignificant storage room. It was a city of the dead, built for a family. The question of what the lower levels contain is genuinely open, not in the way fringe claims are open, where absence of evidence is treated as evidence of concealment, but in the straightforward sense that the archaeology has not been completed. The work is ongoing. The Theban mapping project is still there. The permits are active. The clearance continues, season by season, centimeter by centimeter, through consolidated flood silt in a limestone corridor that has not seen daylight in 3,000 years. Whatever is down there has been waiting since the Bronze Age. It can wait a little longer for the science to reach it. KV5 is still being excavated. The Theban mapping project's work continues, and the lower levels of the largest tomb ever built in the Valley of the Kings have not yet been reached. When the clearance finally breaks through into whatever lies at the deepest point of that stairwell, it will not be announced with a press conference weeks after the fact. It will be a season report, a technical publication, a quiet entry in an ongoing excavation log. The way most of the real discoveries in Egyptian archaeology actually happen. If you want to know when that moment comes, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel covers the archaeology that moves slowly enough that most people miss it. The work that happens between the headlines, in the limestone corridors and the museum storage rooms, and the university labs where the actual answers are being assembled. One question before you go. Burton entered KV5 in 1825 and turned around. Carter entered it in 1902 and used it as a dump. Weeks entered it in 1987 and spent 8 years clearing debris before he understood what he had found. 3 men. 3 different outcomes from the same doorway. Which one do you think about? Leave it in the comments. And if you want to know what else is buried in the Valley of the Kings, what the 7% figure means, for every other incompletely excavated tomb on Wilkinson's 1827 list. That video will be published soon.